Then in March 1923, President Tomlinson was released. President David O. McKay had been president of the British mission for some 5 or 6 months. He came over to Sheffield to preside at the conference. He released President Tomlinson and presented my name as the new conference president. I served there for the remainder of my mission until October 1923. During this time, I had one of the most interesting experiences of my mission. We were having a conference, a branch conference, in Sheffield in July. All of the missionaries of the conference were present at this Sheffield conference. Elder Grover Merrill was my clerk, and on the day before the conference, he asked me if I was going to do anything about releasing this Sheffield branch president. I told him no. I hadn't given it much thought and felt that inasmuch as the 3 or 4 conference presidents before me realized the problem but had decided not to go ahead and replace the man, that I would continue to let things stand as they were. It came time for the evening meeting of the conference. We were singing the opening song, and I began to feel a little bit weak. I wondered what was the matter. I thought possibly I was going to faint. Some 6 or 8 months before, I had fainted while I was speaking in the pulpit. For dinner that Sunday, I had eaten some fish, and it didn't taste good when I ate it. And it made me feel sick the rest of the day, and when I was preaching my sermon, I fainted. I didn't want this to happen again, and I felt a little bit worried. But I thought, well, when we finish singing this song, we'll sit down, and then I'll probably feel better. We sat down, but I didn't feel any better. There came a very strong impression to me that President Shaw of the Sheffield branch should be released. But I thought in my own mind, I've thought about that the last year or 2, but I don't think I will go ahead and do it now. But instead of feeling better, I began to feel worse. And as they started to sing the sacrament song, something said to me in an audible voice to me that President Shaw should be released. I thought about it again for a minute or 2, and then shook my head and thought, no, now isn't the time to do it. I haven't got time to do it at this meeting. And then, as they proceeded singing the song, this voice said again, a little louder, President Shaw should be released. And that made me wonder. Twice I had received that. But still I hadn't decided to take any action. and I was beginning to feel fainter all the time. A little weaker, weaker. And then I thought in my mind, but I can't do it now. And then I received the final word. I could hear it. It wasn't just an impression, but I could hear it. This is my work, and President Shaw should be released. Then I said to myself, all right, I will release President Shaw tonight. But who should I replace him with? All this time, the congregation was singing the sacramental song. And there came to me the thought, well, I could make my companion, Elder Miller, the president of the Sheffield branch for 2 or 3 weeks, and then we can probably find somebody else. And mind you, at this time, I was sitting down. The rest of the congregation was standing, singing this sacramental song. That's the way they used to do it. They used to stand up in singing all of the songs. But as soon as I decided to make the change this night, I felt lots better. My strength came back, and my mind became clear, and I could see what I should do. Then I looked to the right of me and saw George Bailey, the clerk, writing the minutes of the meeting. And around George's face, there was a bright light shining, something like the light we see that is painted around the face of Joseph the prophet when he's shown in the act of prayer. And the strong impression came to me then, George Bailey is the man. And I felt good. Just before they finished singing the song, I said to Brother Shaw, I was sitting next to him, I haven't had time to talk to you about this before now, but we're going to release you tonight as president of the Sheffield branch. I will explain it all to you later. He seemed quite surprised, but he said, oh, well, that's all right. That's all right. Whatever you say, that's all right. That'll be all right with me. So then I reached over and whispered to George Bailey, George, we're going to set you apart tonight as president of the Sheffield branch. Who do you want for your counselors? I could see by George's expression in his face and his action that he was very much surprised and a little bit worried. But I leaned back over to my chair, and just as they were finishing singing the song, George whispered to me, the same 2 counselors will be acceptable to me. So then this was all set. The sacrament service proceeded, and I thought that Abe Harrison would be a good clerk to succeed George. When the sacrament was completed, and before we went into the rest of the meeting, I whispered to George again, would Abe Harrison be satisfactory for a ward clerk? He nodded his head, yes. So then, without saying a word to Brother Harrison, we proceeded. I told the people that Brother Shaw had been very faithful as president of this branch for these last 12 years, and he had been of good service to the people in Sheffield. But we felt strongly now that it was time to make a change. And so we were releasing Brother Shaw with our good wishes, our prayers for his future success and happiness, and our thanks for all that he had done. Then I told them, we are asking Brother Shaw to remain as superintendent of the Sunday school for some 2 or 3 years. In addition to being branch president, Brother Shaw had been superintendent of the Sunday school. And then I asked how many in the congregation would extend to Brother Shaw a vote of thanks for his fine service as president of the branch. Of course, it was unanimous. After the meeting, the missionaries all gathered around, and we set George Bailey apart as president of the Sheffield branch. Then, during the next 2 or 3 months, something happened that was a very pleasant surprise to many of the people of the branch, and to the missionaries, and to me. There were some people, branch coming to church, some of them for 4 or 5 years. But they started gradually coming back now. And this continued for the next 3 or 4 years. We found, too, that some indiscretion had been used when we were not given the opportunity to serve in the Aaronic priesthood simply because their fathers did not observe the word of wisdom. I went over this matter with George, and he could see the point and agreed to immediately correct it. He was going to look up all of those boys, interview them, and in the next year many of them were. Well, to make a long story short, George Bailey served as president of the Sheffield branch for 23 years. And during that time, he converted over 100 people, 8 of them men who courted and married George's own daughters. When he became active in the church, he had 4 daughters. But as time went on, he had a total of 8. They were all married to young men whom George had converted, either before they were married or shortly after. 2 or 3 occasions since that time, he's been out here to conference, and I have met his sisters and 1 or 2 of his daughters. Incidentally, I should tell you that after World War II, Brother Benson, who was president of the European Mission, asked George if he would like to emigrate to America. George said yes, but I haven't got the money. Brother Benson said, I've got a plan. Maybe the way can be opened up for you. I do not know the details of the plan. George didn't tell me. But I do know this. George and his wife, and I think his youngest daughter and husband, came to America in about 1946 or 47, and George was given the position as custodian, up at noon every day, and received visitors to the Washington Chapel for about 2 hours. Take them through the building, explain the gospel story to them. This experience with George Bailey was one of the greatest of my life. And when I look back and consider my missionary experience, the most thrilling of all was when I heard that voice say, "This is my work, and President Shaw should be released." In response to that, I acted as I should have acted. And the results of the change that I made have proved that I was correct. Many of the people that I've seen since or have written to me have told me what a wonderful influence George had been to the people of that branch. One lady during the war wrote and told me what a terrible thing it was to be threatened by air raids every night. And then she said, "But we don't worry. We know that the Lord is with us as long as George Bailey is our branch president." One more word about George Bailey. He was here in 1951 or 52, and the story of his conversion and his experience had reached Ernest Wilkinson of the Brigham Young University. President Wilkinson invited George to address the BYU and bear his testimony in one of their long devotional meetings. I believe they have these meetings every Wednesday. Well, it so happened that Harry Truman, the President of the United States, would be in Utah on that same day. And the BYU had the opportunity of having Harry Truman, President Harry Truman, address the students. President Wilkinson stated that he would have to have an hour or two to make a change because he had already arranged for a speaker. So we got hold of George Bailey and told him the circumstances and said, "Brother Bailey, can you wait another week and address us the following Wednesday? But if you can't, then we'll just tell them that we can't have President Truman on this day. We have already committed ourselves to George Bailey." Well, George called back at Washington, D.C. and talked to his bishop. And the bishop said, "George, by all means, stay another week and take the opportunity to address the students of Brigham Young University. So George did just that. And he felt that it was a feather in his cap to find that if he had wanted to, he could have upset the President of the United States and canceled him from the program. But George said, I didn't want to do that. Especially was I glad that back in Washington, D.C., my superiors granted me the privilege to stay another week and address the Brigham Young University, which he did. He told them of his experience, how he dropped out of activity in the church, how he came back into activity in the church after he had done the will of the Father, so that he would know for surety the truth of the gospel. And President Wilkinson was very well pleased with George's address to the university, to the students of the university, and it is probably an experience that George will forever remember. I haven't heard from George now for 2 or 3 years. I hope that he's still living and in good health. In addition to serving as the custodian and guide for the Washington Chapel, George, for many years, was and has been as far as I know, the first counselor to the Bishop of the Ward.